the coat of amazing colours was somehow, that he was, some kind of flamboyant dresser,
Right.
like gay people.
All right, welcome to Cwic Show. My name is Greg Mattson, and I am your host. Today's guest is Craig Newsom. Craig is joining us all the way from New Zealand. We did an interview together, Craig, a couple of years ago. It's been a couple of years, and I'm going to put a reference to that interview in the description box as well. But been a couple of years. I've got a few more questions, and plus we just had this episode on Joseph of Egypt as gay. And I wanted to get your response on it, just as to put some perspective on this. Craig is a gay member of the church. He's a faithful member of the church out in New Zealand. And was it 5 years ago now or so that you've been a member of the church?
So it'll be coming up 5 years in October. Yeah.
Coming up 5 years in October. Okay. So you had seen the episode. Let me ask you something first. When you first see a topic like that, what are your thoughts?
Well, obviously, super interesting. I was just interested to see what he was going to make of it.
You had a comment. Here's what the comment that you made on there. You said, "So my main problem with Brother Thomas's argument is how he stereotypes gay people." And then you put in flamboyant, snappy dressers, muscle bound, and most disturbingly, kitty fiddlers. Right. So he went through all of those things. It's kind of odd to me that someone, because I think that a lot of people would look at this as very, okay, this is supportive in some ways, somehow of gay individuals, LGBTQ, but you're saying it's a stereotype.
Well, I think, I just found that it was just those typical boxes that the heteronormative kind of culture, I know this is a bit of a generalization, but that, it's that heteronormative people that don't know LGBT people, and there's just this kind of, they're all flamboyant, and all the rest of it. I guess that's what I found. I mean, I don't know I'm not sure whether he was 100% saying Joseph was gay, but I think that he was definitely kind of trying to sort of fit that stereotype onto Joseph. And I think I just, as he went through the different points, I was like, what? I was just like, the coat of amazing colours was somehow, that he was, some kind of flamboyant dresser, like gay people,
Right.
And then at the same time, that, he was muscle bound, and, I guess there was this culture, particularly in the gay male culture, maybe, to a certain degree, of, working out at the gym and, getting the best bods and all that. But then at the same time, I think the only thing I found super offensive about it was that this intimation that because he was playing with the boys, that was somehow, he seemed to have some kind of connotation with that.
Yeah, that's a little disturbing, isn't it?
Yeah, that I found super, offensive. And I think, as I said in part of my comment, was that, the majority of pedophiles, are actually straight males. Mm-hmm. It's a minority that are homosexual males. Yeah. So, and I think just, by kind of letting those kind of concepts carry on within culture, like it's not helping anyone. It's not helping heterosexual people. It's not helping people on the LGBT kind of scale, or whatever you want to call it. It's giving the wrong impression of what it is to be gay.
Okay. And that's, I think, a really good point, because there's a lot of comments we had. I'm going to put this up, I think, in another episode or on Twitter or something, but I took a snapshot of the original video on the YouTube page, right? For Dialogue. The name of the organization is called Dialogue. And they do a number of different videos. I think, they usually average about 100, 200 maybe views per video. And so I took a picture because I wanted to see what would happen to the video if once I put this episode up. And so I took a picture of it. I think it was about 170 views. And last I looked at it, I think it was 6.5 thousand views that they have. So I put that up because I wanted to see what the reaction over there would be. But anyway, I had looked down in their comments. They since turned their comments off, but there were a lot of, and I had obviously a lot of comments too, but on the page over there was one guy, for example, who said, this guy, and he was referring to me, is obviously a hater and a homophobe. And I'm glad that he exposed his attitudes, toward the LGBTQ community. So, I'm paraphrasing, but it was pretty much that. And so I was really confused about that, because it's kind of like, so I can't analyze this from a doctrinal standpoint without stepping on toes. I don't know. What are your feelings on that?
Well, yeah, interestingly enough, I do know Dialogue. And I actually did, I have way too many, I'm subscribed to way too many YouTube channels. So right. I actually just think, I chopped a lot of them off. Mm-hmm. But for the last year or two, I have actually been watching those Dialogue come from sessions, and they're actually really good. Mm-hmm. And, even Thomas is a great guy. I've got his translation of the New Testament as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah. He's a great guy, and, I don't think any the less of him. I guess it was just kind of, I don't think it's about, I think that he was kind of trying to fit gay theology onto a story in the Bible that just didn't really work.
What do you mean by gay theology?
So from what I can gather, and I'm not a complete bright spark on these things, but that, these kind of like, you can look at scriptures through a gay lens, you can look at scripture through an African-American lens, you can look at scripture, through kind of these different kinds of lenses, and there's folk that want to do, through a woman's lens, looking at scripture through a woman's lens. So there's all these kind of lenses and perspectives that people can place on scripture when they think about scripture. So, but my problem was that, I don't mind gay characters being, if they're in the Bible, hey, we made it in. But I just found it that I personally felt that he was trying to put it where it wasn't really thing, and especially, just like 1 minute we were flamboyant, and then next minute, we were these muscle-bound hulks. Right. I don't. Maybe they're not mutually exclusive, but like it was just kind of an unrealistic thing. I think most, gay people are pretty average, normal people. And I think trying to claim that someone is gay because, of their clothing or because of how they behave, I think is a bit, not very.
Yeah. So I know you did this last time with our last interview, but I wanted to do this again because most people on this channel, probably from 2 years ago, have not seen that interview. Can you just kind of go over what brought you to the church and how you built a testimony and decided to get baptized? Okay,
so I've got this down to a few sentences now. So, I was raised in Jehovah's Witnesses and Pentecostal churches. And basically, their teaching, so this is as a youth, and their teachings were that, if you were gay, you were burning in hell for all eternity, no questions asked. So, and also that, we needed to, if you were a gay person that wanted to follow Christ, that we needed to either be delivered of the evil homosexual spirit that we had, or that we need to pray the gay away.
Now, let me clarify this, because there's so many different terms and words, and people have different ideas of what gay means and et cetera. But so what you're talking about as being gay is who you are as a person and what you would identify as, and having same-sex attraction, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, look, personally, I have a problem with same-sex attraction, only because possibly it's a bit American. No offense, everyone.
Okay.
But also, I think same-sex attraction makes being gay all about sex. And so I've lived for 5 years, nearly 5 years now, without sex.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make me not gay?
Right, because you're living the law of chastity, right?
Yes.
So, right,
Yeah.
and so, right, that's a really good point. I had never thought of that, because I've got a lot of friends that will not identify as gay, right? That because, I mean, to me, you're gay, but they don't identify as gay because they see that. And again, maybe this is an American thing. We have so many identities here in words, it's hard to follow, but it's kind of like they see that as a certain lifestyle. Right. And so when they think that when they use the term gay, it encompasses overall a lifestyle. And because they're faithful members of the church, either married or single, and married, some of them married with family and kids. And I think same-sex attraction may not be the best alternative word, but that's why they don't want to use the term gay.
Yeah. And look, I get that. And I totally respect, no matter, LGBT people are just like everybody else. There's 1,000 versions of the way that we are,
Mm-hmm.
So, and the labels that we choose to use and the labels that we're comfortable with. And so, I don't feel any, animosity towards things. And I know that I think it's very complex, especially possibly people that are brought up in the church, because, there's this Church of Jesus Christ kind of way of being.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you do happen to be LGBT, then what you're going to do is you're going to leave the church and you're going to go and live the lifestyle. Whereas, so for people like me that are converts to the church, I converted, when I was 54, so 53. So for me, I've lived an entire life
mm-hmm.
of, except possibly the first 25 years, but, my entire life in the so-called gay lifestyle. Mm-hmm. But, for being in the gay lifestyle, for me, it didn't involve going to gay bars. It didn't involve having a whole heap of gay friends. I obviously had, some mm-hmm. gay friends, but the majority of my friends are straight. Mm-hmm. And I've got to admit that, since I've joined the church, I haven't let go of any of my gay friends. I haven't let go of any of my, I'm not the most straight acting gay person. But, I haven't let go of any of that.
So what about, that's a good question. What about your gay friends that you had before? What is their reaction? I mean, you say you stayed friends with them. What has their reaction been to you converting to the church?
I think so. Most of them don't really think about it in terms of conversion to Mormonism, because Christians are very much the minority in New Zealand. Mm-hmm. So I guess all of my gay friends, they were concerned at first because they thought that I was joining a religion that wasn't going to let me be me. Mm-hmm. After the first few months, and they realised that I was still the same Craig. I perhaps didn't talk about some of the stuff that I used to talk about in terms of, stuff. But otherwise, they know that I'm happy, and they know that I haven't really changed in terms of my love for them, for instance. Mm-hmm. So they're fine with it. They're fine with it now. Yeah. But I think, things are more, from what I can gather, just looking at online on the States, and, obviously I spend a lot of time online, I think things are kind of more polarized and stuff overseas, particularly in America, and quite possibly particularly in the Bible Belt and this, the kind of, is it the Wasatch Front?
Yeah, that's Utah.
Yeah, I think things are more polarized there, politically.
Mhm.
People talk about this whole, Democrat and Republican thing. Mate, I wouldn't have a clue what any of my friends think politically.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have a clue. I wouldn't have a clue how they vote.
Yeah.
Nobody.
That is so refreshing. Different world here, Craig. It's an absolutely different world here.
So, and I think it's the same with the gay. I think it's the same with the LGBT thing. I think, the gay thing is more politicized there, or, elsewhere in the world. Sorry, I should just say elsewhere in the world. And little old happy New Zealand way down under, we kind of, everybody kind of gets along. And sure, I'm not saying that we're a perfect culture, and, obviously, for instance, over the COVID thing, there's the vaxxers and the non-vaxxers. People are have strong opinions on how
so that got there too.
Has handled. Oh, of course we have. Yeah. But the thing is, so for me, who's quite happy to be vaxxed, and we had this big protest, around the government buildings, not, the anti-vaxxers. I was quite happy to go through there and walk through there, and I bumped into friends and had a good time, and then I was like, because the media was presenting this certain, aspect of the protest, and I thought, I'll go and have a look for myself. Go and have a look. They all seemed pretty happy to me, there was no unfriendliness or anything like that. So, yeah, I'm just saying that culturally here, I think that things are slightly different to other places in the world. So going back to your initial question in terms of being gay and being Christian, I think as long as people know that you're happy, they tend to live and let live.
So back to the other question, going back, I forget where we stopped here, but your story getting to the church.
Oh, yeah. So yeah, I was raised in that, pray the gay away stuff. So very long story short, when I accessed the teachings of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the current prophets and brethren were teaching that, if you're gay, that's not such a problem. But we need to live the law of chastity, that marriage is between a man and a woman, and so therefore kind of for people like me, that meant living chastity. And for me, as a 53-year-old at the time, I'd lived a very, very full life. And so, learning about the gospel of Jesus Christ, learning about our churches, which I felt was much more, instead of condemning us for the very fact that we're gay, but actually just saying it's not cool to have, sex. I was happy to give that a shot. And then once I realised the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon and the truthfulness of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and also how he could enable me to live the gospel, I was all in. So it hasn't really been it. But I've got to admit, I really worry for young people. I think for a young person, who's like 20 and just coming to terms with sexuality, and then, learning that the church, they can't be like temporary communion holders if they're, not living chastity. I think that's a real, and it bugged me then, and it still to a certain extent bugs me now. But I know plenty of younger people that are living the gospel. But I think also for those who don't, I do love what our church teaches is that, even if person is as Brother Osler, can't remember his first name, but as Brother Osler talks about people that are not living within the circle of our doctrine, how should we, treat them? And, he says with kindness and love and respect. I love the Tom Christopherson's story. His family treated him with love and respect, and for 25 years or 20 years or something, he was...
Yeah, even when he was out of the church, obviously.
Yeah, even he was out of the church and married to a man, they still treated him with love and respect. Lo and behold, he's come back to church later on in life. So, yeah, I just think the prophet said something a few years ago, and I need to look up the talk because I've referenced it, and I don't actually know which talk it was in. But he's mentioned in a talk at conference about heterosexual sexual sin and homosexual sexual sin should be treated the same way. And I really loved that. Like I was like, yes, we're not any worse than any other.
It's a universal law that we all follow.
Yeah. But the implications of it are different for gay people. Because we can't.
It's harder for you, but it's the same law.
Yeah. So we can't up and marriage and so forth, So obviously, I think the cross that we choose to carry to, Jesus said, take up his cross and follow me. I think that cross, I don't think that it's just a different cross. It's not a different cross, sorry. It's a burdensome cross. It's a burdensome cross.
Yeah.
But it's not, take my yoke upon you. My yoke is light.
Yeah.
So that kind of.
Right. That's what you do. Yeah. That's what you do. That's inspiring. So one more thing though on that, because I remember a couple of years ago on your story, you had a very interesting way of where you first started looking at the church, because you were watching videos on another channel that was more of an anti-Mormon channel.
Yeah.
And that was involved with, I think they were Jehovah's Witnesses, because you had a background as a Jehovah's Witness and they were talking about it. And you learned on that channel that the Mormons maybe treated things a little bit differently than what you had been used to maybe in the past. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So I think Jehovah's Witnesses and, Mormons always get, compared or kind of lumped in, together sometimes. But, a completely different experience. It's not, they're not the same at all. I can see the reasons for that lumping together. These, they're both very serious about living commandments. There's this hierarchical structure. So the witnesses have their governing body. We have the quorum of the 12 and a prophet. So I can kind of, I think externally looking, there's some similarities, but also the disparities are just, they don't, the witnesses don't have Jesus Christ. They do, but he's not thought of.
Not the same doctrine of Christ.
Yeah. Oh, definitely not. Yeah.
So you were watching, what's the name of the channel?
I was watching Mormon Stories.
Mormon Stories.
Yeah.
You're watching Mormon Stories, and you were interested in the Jehovah's Witnesses that were being interviewed, right? But Mormon Stories, in a sense, brought you to look more into the church.
Well, yeah, because I was watching the HJ Dub stuff, and then one of the HJ Dub guys did an interview with John DeLynn.
Yes.
And on John DeLynn's channel, and then I started watching the LDS stuff.
It's so funny. It's just you ended up going the other way that a lot of other people do when they watch, because obviously people that are already in the church and they start watching that, some of them leave the church, and you actually came the other way around.
Well, I think there was a lot of contributing factors, but I think one of the main contributing factors was that lovely, lovely woman, the poetess, I think we did this last time. So I was hugely influenced by Carolyn Pearson's story, because, she married a guy, turned out to be gay, he left the church, but then he caught AIDS, came back. He didn't come back to the church, but him and Carolyn, she nursed him until the end of his life.
Yes.
And that just blew my mind. Like, that was just the fact that this wonderful Christian woman would, take her ex-husband back in and nurse him until he died, was just the most Christ-like thing that I've ever seen in my entire life. And so that was what really, I was like, no matter what, because John, at my time, John Denon was doing quite a few interviews with, LGBT people that had left the church. But, all of those interviews, they all talked about, their great love for the gospel and their great love for the church, and but, they couldn't deal with the whole, living celibacy for 60 years, So that was when I first sort of started going, there's something more to this. And, and then there was things that got brought up in Mormon Stories interviews, such as, the first vision, discrepancies, swords and horses in the Book of Mormon, all that, the normal stuff.
The little things, the trivial things.
And, so that led me on to places like Fair Mormon. Fair LDS now.
Fair Latter-day Saints, I think, or something like that. Yeah.
Dan Peterson, Hugh Nibley, all these great guys and girls, from Fair. So I started looking at kind of the answers to the anti stuff. Yeah, and then that culminated in, going to a sacrament and meeting with the missionaries. And once the missionaries started, and also getting the Book of Mormon and reading the Book of Mormon, and that was what really started the spiritual progress, rather than it just being a mental thing, but actually being a spiritual journey.
And you'd gone to church, and wasn't quite what you thought it was when you got there, right?
Well, ex-Pentecostal was boring. I only did the sacrament meeting, and it wasn't what I thought. And
the demographics weren't what you thought.
Well, the demographics were great, though. I was really glad about the demographics, because I'm going to be a majority, white church, and I'm part Maori, most of my friends are Maori, I was kind of like, ugh. And then I walked into church, and it was like,
for our American friends, that's Maori here. Yeah.
So 80% of the congregation, 90% of the congregation was Maori or Pacific Islander. So in that sense, I was like, woo. That's kind of got an interesting how that's kind of turned about in New Zealand. I know you want to talk about that later on, but it's really been the gospel and the Book of Mormon that have really changed my life.
Right. And so now 5 years, you've been a member of the church, you live in the law of chastity, you've given up a lot, but I remember from our previous interview, one of the things that was so important to you, and I think you not maybe always wanted to, because you had some really difficult lessons in life that were thrown on you. But you seem like you always were someone who really wanted a relationship with God. And you felt like you, for so many times and so many bouts of going back to religion, and it just wasn't there for you, right? It didn't feel like there was a possibility for you to be a gay man and have a relationship with God. And I hope I'm not putting words in your mouth, but that's what I seem to remember from our previous conversation. Yeah. And then when you did find the church, it seems to me that you were able to finally make those things and pull them together. And it's like, okay, I can finally have more of a relationship with God that maybe I couldn't find anywhere else.
Yeah. I think the main, like, the main thing with our church or all our theology is that, I'm not, from a theological point of view, I can still be who I am. I don't have to like pretend to be something that I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
I can still be my flamboyant, gorgeous self and not feel guilty about that.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I think from previous, touches with Christianity, there was always this, this whole kind of heaven-hell business, in that, not heaven-hell like in terms of our theology, but heaven-hell in terms of Calvinist theology.
Yes. Hardcore Christian theology. Yeah.
Well, it's just hardcore. If you don't know Christ, you burn in hell, a literal burning in hell for all eternity. And I could never mesh that with a God of love.
Mm-hmm.
And so the levels of glory, and spirit prison and spirit paradise, that made a lot more sense to me than these previous theologies, and I think I think the atonement of Jesus Christ, which is in those other theologies, but also the great love that God has for his children, and him really, I was raised with a God that was very quick to condemn us to hell. Whereas now I love a God who is very quick to want us to be in some form of salvation,
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's celestial.
Yeah. Well, we all have an opportunity. Of course, you and me and everybody else have an opportunity for the ideal one way or the other. I fully believe that.
Yeah.
And, that's one of the things I try to talk about a lot, is that it's like you said, there's a single law, and therefore there are the same consequences according to the law. And regardless of who we are, based on obedience, that we all can benefit, we can all get the same reward. Really. Mm-hmm. I fully believe that. And that's the opposite of what a lot of the people I talk about believe, which is, there's an assimilation to a single ideal that we can all move toward and be one together. And, I think that's a big part of what Gathering Israel is. And whether you're gay or you're straight or you're black or you're white or anything else, is like the Book of Mormon says, right? We can all pull together, and we can all move to the ideal in one way or another.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because, over, the last few years in the church, like I've even, got friends that say, why do you always talk about being gay? Which, I don't really talk about being gay, but, I guess I have a gay viewpoint of stuff. Mm-hmm. And, they go, oh, why can't you just, one of my best friends, she always says, why do you say you're gay? Why can't you just be a child of God? And I'm like, well, I am a child of God. Of course I'm a child of God first, but I am also a child of God who happens to be gay. Mm-hmm. And I think those, getting into some of that CRT stuff, I think it's a difficult kind of road to tread, to find the balance between my, identification as a gay man. Sure. And my identification as a child of God. And, I'm a child of God first, but that doesn't change the fact that I'm gay.
That's the issue.
Yeah, and I think that the trouble is, for heterosexual people or, so-called normal people, I think it's really difficult because, people make objections to, us gay people being so fabulous about being gay. Mm-hmm. And they don't understand it, people go, oh, well, no, I don't run around, identifying as a straight person. Mm-hmm. And, it's like, yeah, but that's because you don't have to.
Mhm.
You know, our whole culture is set up from birth with the pink and the blue, you know, baby outfits
Mhm.
to the expectations of little boys and little girls and their first kiss and their first date, their first hold handing, you know, their first kiss, you know, their first looking forward to marriage, you know, all of that is just like inculcated in the culture.
Mhm.
Like, so heterosexual people there's no need for them to identify as straight.
Mhm.
But for people that aren't in that majority situation, you know, to a certain extent, we do have to know, you know, who we are. But, you know, I've been listening with great interest to the CRT stuff because I can see it creeping in here. I can see it creeping in. In fact, we had a big event at school last year, at the school that I work at, that kind of brought this. It was like, oh my gosh, the CRT stuff is like in New Zealand.
Right. Yeah.
But it's interesting, and I think it's interesting for people like me, or you know, people that are in minorities. We see the CRT stuff, and I think a lot of it, some of it is good, but I do see some of it as being, not great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think what you're saying is right. The balance on things. I think, you know, we all have a number of different identities. It's just like we have a number of different roles. You know, I'm a husband. I'm a father, though I'm not a husband to everyone, right? I'm a father to others. So I have different identities that I bring together. I'm a son of parents. I'm a son of God. I think the key on that I believe is that because CRT's issue is with race is kind of like you're saying. While you identify as gay, it says you can't be colorblind, right? Which is the opposite of like what Martin Luther King said. He said more along the lines of we need to be colorblind. So there's two different principles, I think, there, right? One is we do need to learn to not see race so much, right? And that we need to all be able to. His point was that we should be able to all assimilate to a similar law, a similar culture to some degree, and not see race. And it's the same thing with you and me. It's like, okay, you're gay, I'm heterosexual, but above that, though, there's another balancing side, which is we're both children of God. So you and I can talk about the gospel, we can talk about the spirit, we can talk about testimony, we can talk about the plan of salvation. And it's like, okay, you and I are in the same boat in the sense that we're children of God, and that's our primary role. It's our primary identity. But there are differences with us, and so and you can't completely negate that. That doesn't make any sense either.
Yeah.
Right. And in so many ways, it's like it's more beautiful. Right, to have people of different color, to different cultures and different backgrounds, different sexual orientation, whatever it might be, and have us be able to assimilate. If we're all the same, there's no stretching in that regard, right? There's no reason to stretch. It gives us less opportunity for charity with each other. But when there's differences, I think that you have to work with that to move toward that ideal again of Zion and gathering Israel but first and foremost, and I see the brethren talk about this all the time. If they talk about race, they every time I've seen it, they open up by talking about first being a child of God.
Yeah.
You know,
I think I don't know whether you watch Brother Halverson's podcast.
No.
But you know who I'm talking about, eh?
Yes.
But he has this big point that he talks about all the time, is talking about the proving of contraries. So, you know, you've got this contrary of, you know, kind of the stuff that we're talking about, you know, exactly what you were just talking about. And I think that his kind of, tagline about the proving of contraries is so important, you know, in all sorts of areas of the gospel. You know, how do I prove this contrary of me being a gay man, and being true to that, but also being true to my identification as a child of God, and how do they work together, and when I manage to make them work together, they do create a beautiful thing, and I experience that all the time as a member of the church and in my ward and in my state.
Sure.
And in my general life too.
Tell us about the church in New Zealand. What's going on there? How does that look for you? I mean, what do you experience as a member of the church there in New Zealand?
It's great.
Small population of members.
Small population of members. All the missionaries that come here seem to think that we're Zion. We're not, but they certainly seem to already love it. So I think the church in New Zealand has a really, really interesting history because, so back in the colonisation years of the early 1800s, the Christianity came, with they sent not our missionaries, but mostly Anglican and Methodist missionaries. And they got converts, obviously, among the Maori people. And in a lot of senses, Maori took to Christianity like ducks to water. That there was vast, conversion rates. But quite a few of the quite a few of the tribes, they knew that Christianity was true, but they weren't sure which church to join. And so they went to these people called matakite. So matakite are like seers. And so they went to the matakite and then they said, what church shall we join? And and probably 4 specific geographical areas of the country, in the upper North Island and in the lower North Island, the matakite prayed and fasted for 3 days, and they had different versions of this thing, whereas to say that the true church hasn't arrived yet, but wait, they will come in pairs. They will they'll raise their hands or raise their right hand when they pray, and that they will speak the Māori language. They will bring the gospel to you in Māori, in Te Reo Māori, or the Māori language. So because all the missionaries up until that time had been, teaching the gospel in English and expecting Māori people to become, Pākehā or non-white. When the matakite said, that there would be these signs of, coming in pairs and lifting their hands when they pray and preaching the gospel in Māori, that was pretty, major. So anyway, next minute, I think 1850, I want to say, but don't quote me on that. The first LDS missionaries turned up. And so what they did, unlike the other missionaries, they went and lived among the Māori rather than just going and preaching to them and going home afterwards. So that was really major because all the colonizers and stuff, So anyway, they turned up in pairs, and so they knew that this was the true church. So there was mass, tribal, whole tribes and whole iwi would join the church. So I never actually knew this just until the beginning of last year when we went to a big hui or meeting up in north of Auckland. But apparently, we were 98% a Māori church until the 1950s. And then what happened was with the building program, so in the late 1940s, they started the building program. They built the temple. They built all the chapels around the country, kind of all around the same time. And I think that was I'm not 100% clear on what happened there, but I think it became, that the church in Utah they decided that it was like time to go out and preach to non-Māori as well as Māori. So, and I think it sort of became a little more mixed then. And I think to this day, like it's probably more mixed, but there's 6 or 7 generations of Māori whānau family that have belonged to the church since 1850s. There's some big big sort of family names,
So are there a lot more Maori than white settlers in New Zealand that are members of the church?
Probably even today, I'd say yes. But there's also a lot of Pacific Islanders. So back in the 50s and 60s, so basically, what's that story in the Book of Mormon? Is it Haggith?
Yes.
Yes. So there was this early story that the islanders and the Maori, because the Maori basically came from the islands originally. Mm-hmm. So the islanders were all descendants of Haggith. So that, like a lot of Pacific Islanders and Maori, kind of like we have our connection to the Book of Mormon is that we're the descendants of Haggith. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but not just Māori, but probably even more today. There's a ton of Pacific Islanders. I think Tonga, like 50% of the Tongan population, even in Tonga, is Church of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, very high percentage.
Heaps of Samoans. So all those people that have come and settled in New Zealand, so like in Wellington City, the capital, they've got one ward in the capital city, but there's also a Tongan-speaking ward, and like I think that's bigger than the non-Tongan ward.
So isn't that funny how certain peoples, I don't know if it's culture, I don't know if it's blood, but there's just certain groups of people that seem to, it's like beyond that, if you look at, like Europe is, nothing happens there, hardly at all, right? But you go to Africa, and there's just such great success there. Or you go to the Philippines, much more than any other part of Asia, I believe, is really does well. And then Tonga, the Maoris, it's there's just certain pockets of groups of people that seem to accept the gospel easier.
Yeah, I mean, if you listen to the anti-Mormon crew, their answer to that is because in Africa and the Philippines and those areas that you mentioned hasn't got high internet uptake. And the reason why the church is basically not doing great in Europe is because there is high internet, and so they get to see all the...
but I would say it's been decades since it hasn't done well in Europe before the internet.
Yeah, I mean, I think particularly in terms of Māori ideology, and the thing about the gospel is, the restored gospel, is that there's lots of stuff that really line up with Māori ideology long before the settlers came. Mm-hmm. They have things like these steps there's a lot of things that really tie in with the gospel that isn't in traditional Christianity, that really melds very well with Māori culture.
Okay.
So I think that's also another reason. I don't know about those other areas, but for Māori, because especially a lot of the fundamentalist Christian groups, they, like for instance Jehovah's Witnesses, we were told you're not allowed to go onto traditional Māori marae or traditional Māori villages, because all our funerals and big meetings take place back on what we call the marae.
Right.
And the tradition, the J-Dubs said, no, you're not allowed to visit there. You're not allowed to speak the language. That was why, a lot of the witnesses, I think that's why Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has been much more successful among Māoridom anyway, is because it's got such a beautiful, I think the emphasis on whānau, our family, is really resonates with Māori. All sorts of things.
Yeah.
And like there's lots of people that aren't active, but, you know, they know the church is true. But they're not active. There's seen, and this is just my observation, so I could be talking a load of rubbish, but it seems that there seems to be this pattern that people grow up in the church, they leave, but then they come back later on in life. Like, I love my ward, I love my stake. I have not had any issues in terms of being a gay man. I've been, the first 2 weeks after I got baptised, I was up in a stake conference bearing my testimony.
Oh, really?
You know, and I said to the stake president, you know, I'll talk about being gay, eh? And he goes, yeah, that's all right. And, you know, they made me the gospel doctrine teacher on a Sunday. Yeah, so, you know, like I haven't, you know, I know that I'm loved. Yeah, and yeah, I know that, that my ward and my stake is fantastic. And, you know, I've met some people from out of my area in the past, so, and they've all been great too. So,
what, you know, just wrapping up here a little bit, what would you say? I mean, it's a difficult message, but what would you say to someone who is gay in the church and they're looking to leave? I mean, is there anything you would say to them? Is it, I mean, obviously, again, let's say they're young. I mean, what if they were sitting down with you and they wanted your advice? What would you say?
Well, we've got a missionary who served here, and he's come out as gay since he went home, and I'm still in communication with him. And you know, like I just said to him, you know, just love Christ. Don't stop your relationship with God just because you're not, you know, being part of the church. You know, because he wanted to go out and he wanted to think. I mean, I guess the thing that really, I think the main message that I would give, you know, actually to all members of the church, you know, is to please study and know what the church teaches about being LGBT in 2022 in the church. Please be very clear about that, because the messaging that we get from the apostles and prophets is that we need to love these people, you know, and, you know, I see online, you know, all the time, you know, oh, my family rejected me because I left the church because I was gay. And I'm like, what is going on with these families? Don't you know what the church teaches? The church does not teach you to reject your kid because they're gay. The church teaches you to love your kids, whether they're gay or thing. And like, I guess it makes me really angry when people don't want to know what the apostles and prophets are teaching, and, you know, just learning to love people. And, you know, I say to young ones, it's really, really difficult. It is really, really difficult, Greg. And you know, there's no best answer. I think the only best answer that I can have is, you know, please don't give up on God, or whatever. But, you know, and please don't think that God hates you because you're gay, because this is just simply not true. Like, I think I can't begin to imagine what it's like to be in a place where, you know, the majority of the population is either Christian or LDS, because, you know, the amount of messaging that people get, you know, is, you know, it can be skewed how people feel about themselves. You know, I had a friend last year he passed away about a year ago, but, you know, he was 10 years younger than me, but he rejoined the church the same time that I joined, and we met at North Star, and we talk to each other daily on Messenger chat.
Great organization, I think.
Yeah, and but, you know, he was 45. he was in a totally, LDS kind of thing. And don't get me wrong, I'm not blaming the church. There was mental health issues and other stuff. But he killed himself a year ago. And he killed himself because he felt that he could never be what his family wanted him to be.
Yeah.
And that's the
so
very
tragic.
real, that's the very real thing that we live with. And like that, that devastated me at the time, and I remember when this is probably, I hope we can chop this maybe later, I don't know. But
sure.
I was devastated, and I remember, at that point of grief, and, I said to the Lord and my friend who was sitting there, poor girl, this is ridiculous, there's three, maybe 4 scriptures in the Bible that say, reference same-sex stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the main one is Romans. When you read Romans chapter 1, if you actually read it really properly, it's not talking about people that are gay by orientation. It's talking about people that know God and leave him and therefore become some kind of perversion. Mm-hmm. But it's not actually talking about gay people that are gay by orientation. There's the Levitical stuff. Well, there's a lot of Levitical craziness in that, thing. And there's nothing in the Book of Mormon. There's nothing in Doctrine and Covenants, and there's nothing in Pearl of Great Price. I'm like, why are we as a culture so uptight about homosexual stuff when there's very little evidence against it in the Bible? Mm-hmm. I mean, I get that, the family is the foundation. I get that a man and a woman produce offspring. I get all that stuff. But, all I was thinking at the time in my grief was 3 scriptures and my mate kills himself. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I'm not
tragic.
I'm blaming the church. I'm not blaming the church. I'm not blaming the teaching of the church. As I said, there was mental health issues as well. But how he was raised contributed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Craig, really appreciate your time. Is there anything else you wanted to add, or?
No, I guess the only thing is, don't give up on your LGBT friends and offspring and everyone else, because there's a place for everyone in God's kingdom, and we just need to love like the Savior loves.
Yeah. Appreciate your perspective, your friendship, and your example to, I think, many people, and it's important. I mean, we need those. It's people need someone to look to that has similar circumstances and looking to try and be faithful and do things right. I think you do that.
Oh, thank you.